All right, everybody, welcome to our monthly Level Up Leadership Summit. Just so you know, these online events are designed to help you get to know the leaders here at Experian and also gain insight into the leadership skills needed to grow your career. During today's webinar, we encourage you to chat with others. If you're in the WebEx, if you look on the right-hand side and you click on the chat icon, there's a place where you can go ahead and post questions, share insights that Alpa is sharing that you find interesting and helpful. And also just to let you know, when you first post a message, it'll automatically default to just the host. So go ahead and select everyone so everyone can see the questions you're asking. And it's also a great place to network while we're having this WebEx, so I want to encourage you to do that. Today we're talking with Alpa, and Patty's going to share a little bit about her bio.
Yeah, so prior to joining Experian, Alpa worked for various firms leading and managing teams to execute large-scale projects in both public and private sectors across North America. Alpa joined Experian in 2012 and has a well-rounded expertise in key business functions, including managing and running the prospecting suite of solution CIS product marketing, as well as experience in areas of legal compliance, sales, and the National Customer Assistance Center. Alpa Jain was Vice President of the API Center of Excellence for EITS for several years and is currently VP of EITS Strategic Projects. Alpa, thanks for being our guest today.
Thank you. Great to be here.
All right, so let's just get into this. When did you know you wanted to work in a leadership role?
Yeah, so interesting enough, I actually struggled with this question a little bit. So I asked my husband last night, and I point back asked him, like, when did he want to know he wanted to be in leadership? And he goes, well, since I was a kid, Alpa. And he goes, so did you? And I sat there and I looked at him and I said, he goes, yeah, you always so wanted to be in leadership since you were a kid. And as I was thinking about his response, as much as I don't like admitting he's right. I took a look back and I was thinking about, growing up and thinking about my experiences from even being a classical Indian dancer. So I grew up with doing Bharatanatyam and classical Indian dancing. And I think about the times of when you were choreographing a dance for a performance, right? And the training it took and how you led your dance group to help them get through that training or train together and inspire to do different things and how you choreograph your dance. And it really reminded me that, from a very young age, I liked being in these leadership roles. I enjoyed being in these leadership roles, right? And what you pulled together and how you choreographed it was all about delivery and execution, and then that moment on stage, which was fantastic. But he was absolutely right in saying that, I wanted to be a leader from my very, very young days. And as I think about, my career journey and my progression in all aspects, it's like you somehow, in some respects, fall into leadership roles, but then you also thrive on it, right? So you naturally go to these roles as you start to take on more responsibilities, different types of projects, and it reminds you of like how much you love doing what you do, and that's fundamentally why I love being in leadership and, from a very young age wanting to continue in those types of roles.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because I think growing up for me, I never even thought about that.
No,
it never even crossed my mind at all. So fascinating that your husband was like, from a kid that he wanted to do it, and then you were kind of like already interested in kind of grooming yourself for that. Alpa, what were some things that you did early on to kind of prepare yourself?
Yeah, so I think from an early stage, right, I like reading, right? So a lot of, leadership books, those are great. Participating in, different type of learnings, networking. Experian has these great tools, right? Like you could go online and do a bunch of e-learnings. You can be fortunate to participate in like EBNs, like Experian Business Network. But I think personally it was also, I like getting my hands dirty, right? I like getting involved. I always liked pushing myself to go find a new project or find a stretch assignment and focus in on areas that I knew I wanted to develop myself And so I found myself, picking areas of where you may not necessarily have influence over or direct control over a team, but you have to work very closely with another team to influence them to take them down this path and why you want to deliver this. So through that, it's like getting more assignments, getting hands-on experience, reading, talking to other leaders in the organizations, right, of what their experience is on, and learning through that has really helped me through that journey and that process, essentially, of, developing my leadership skills, growing into leadership roles, and then today, making me to who I am today.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned, I think part of being a high performer is like you said, getting your hands dirty, getting into the work. But when you move into like leadership roles, a lot of times you're kind of handing off that work. How do you kind of balance those things?
Yeah, so I think as you get into these roles, one of the most critical things is how you create that culture of your team, right? Creating a culture of respect and trust, right? And bringing in and working with the right talent, right? Because you're right, you can't go into the weeds all the time. You can't get your hands dirty all the time. You've got to trust your leadership team to do that. And so how do you do that? How do you start to delegate? How do you start to just become more, your time is spent in different areas sometimes. It's establishing that culture of respect and trust early on in your team and making sure it stays there, and empowering your team to make those decisions, empowering them to making sure that they know that you have their back, right? Nobody's perfect. Mistakes are going to be made. But it's how you manage through that is the most important things, because you have to delegate, right? We can't do it all, but you have to be there when they need your help or they need your guidance, right? Through whatever they're working on. And so I think it all comes back to your team environment and making sure that you establish that trust factor between all members of your team very early on, and that it runs all throughout your organization.
So what do you think are some crucial skills that you would need to improve on to be sure that you can empower your employees and be able to delegate?
So I think important skills, you have to be able to communicate effectively, right? You want to be able to share a vision, share the story, tell a story. You want to be able to think strategically. You want to develop relationships, right? A lot of the work that we do is built on relationships, right? And that trust that you develop with that. You want to have those core skills to make sure that you have those skills and that your team has those skills, right? So it's not just about what you have as a leader, it's about how you're bringing other great leaders together that work together within a team that have like minds, that have similar philosophies, that share a purpose, share the vision, right, and live your values, right? So you live and breathe those values together, because then you can truly get done what you need to get done, right? And then you create that sense of empowerment and that sense of ability to execute. And those are all skills that it takes time, but they're so critical in what we do and so foundational to everything to leading to success.
Taking into account everything you just said, is there a leader or a mentor that comes to mind when you think of someone who embodies all these qualities and really affected your leadership style?
Yeah, so I go back to my early days. So I started off my career, interesting enough, as a structural engineer. So my background is civil engineering, minored in structures. I designed high-rises for about 10 years up in Canada, yeah. And then before I had moved down and did a little bit of civil engineering out here, so mostly infrastructure. And I go back to my days up in Calgary when I'll never forget one of my first jobs, my first high rises that I designed, I had to go do a site inspection. And so it was a day of a concrete pour. They're supposed to give, meaning the contractor's supposed to give the engineers at least 24 to 48 hours notice. I had no notice, so I rushed out to the construction site, climbed up 15 flights, right, to
wow.
inspect the slab, and they'd already started pouring the concrete. And I'm walking around on the floor, and I noticed that the top rebar and the bottom rebar flipped. That's a significant issue. That's a very big issue from a structure standpoint.
Yeah.
So I'm standing there trying to tell them to stop pouring the concrete. And, I'm sure you can imagine all the obscenities that were fired back at me. Through, and they said, no, get off the floor, and they basically kicked me off. As I turned around, they purposely sprayed me with concrete because they were so mad at me for trying to stop the floor, right? This is many, many years ago. And so I go back down, I talk to the site super, and he starts screaming at me, because, to stop a pour, it's a big thing, and they're going to have to shovel out a ton of concrete from that slab up on the 15th floor. And so he didn't buy what I said, so he called my boss. And my boss turned around and told him, well, if she said that, that's right, I stand behind her. And so I think about the question that you just asked me, and the values, the skills that he believed in me, he trusted me, he respected me. He told me, Alpa, don't leave. You've got it right. We're going to back you. That is somebody that made such a big impact on my life. It made me realize the type of leader I wanted to be, and what was so important, and how you get things done, right? And how you leave an impression, how you influence, how you inspire. He had those qualities simply by, taking that one action. And I can tell you that site super was like, no, I want her off my site, kick her out, trying to throw me out. You can name it. He tried to. And even after that, my boss sent me out on every single site inspection on that site. He wouldn't let me bow down. He taught me to be tough, when to be tough, how to communicate. So all those skills, I would say he probably had the biggest impact on my career, and it's helped me so far. And I remember that story. It's one of my favorite stories, but it definitely taught me a lot to who I wanted to be as I grew in my career.
Yeah, I think that's really empowering, because I think a moment like that where someone's kind of just yelling at you, it's like a make or break moment. I can just kind of become meek and shrivel away because this person's yelling at me, but I think having your boss behind you really does empower you. I think that's a really nice story.
Yeah, I think also what's really cool, Alpa, is that what a great example of a leader who's protecting his team, right? That's an amazing leader to back your employee and protect them.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, nobody is perfect. Everyone is going to make mistakes. You're going to have moments of failures, right? And it can be small things, how you feel like a presentation didn't go well, and you're going to beat yourself up. But it's really how you act after that and what you do, right? And at the end of the day, it's about having that leadership support to help you get through that, right? And help you and still believe in you. Now, if you're going to make the same mistake 15 times, we have an issue, right? Let's all be honest. But it's that leadership backing in you that gives people the ability to keep going, right? Because if you're going to feel like you're left out in the rain, you're not going to get anything accomplished.
Yeah, it's not a good feeling.
Yeah, Alpa, you talked a lot about the importance of trust within a team. I'm curious about ways you help to build trust. How do you work with your team so that you can trust them to get their work done, so that then you can do a better job of empowering them?
Yeah, I think it's important to get to know your team really well, right? So it's not just from a work perspective. I like putting a human touch on it. We all have lives outside of these walls, And so understanding not only their skill set from a work perspective and where they excel, what their ambitions are, what their passions are, but weaving into that we all have lives outside, right? It's connecting with your team at different levels to understand what they do and why they need to do it. It's also explaining to them, why we're doing something, right? It's not just go and deliver it. It's having that understanding, that sense of purpose. And so when you start to bring these different elements together, you develop a relationship. And those are relationships then you build on trust. And sometimes you've got to get into the thick of things with them. Sometimes you've got to let them go and carve out their own path. But as leaders, by doing those things, you create that trust between yourself and your team, and that's what carries you through the good times, the successful times, and the times where you may need to pivot and find a new path, a new road to go down, and new goals. But that's how you bring those elements together to create that trust environment and a relationship between you and your team.
Alpa, I love that you're so focused on building good relationships with your team. I'm curious about something that I have difficulty with is when you need to have those difficult conversations with certain team members. How do you go about doing that? Because you are so invested in getting to know them personally, getting to know maybe part of their family lives, but then you now need to have a difficult conversation with them about something.
Yeah, so it's important to set expectations, right? We do have relationships, but we do have targets and goals and tasks, right? It's not letting things fester, right? So if there is an issue and you have to have a difficult conversation, you have it immediately, right? You don't let it drag out to, months and potentially even longer than that, right? You have to address these things head on, but setting your expectation is very important, right? We are here to achieve certain goals and targets. That's a fact. Yep. That's how you run the business, right? And we're all measured, and it's very clear that, even though you have these relationships, that's how the business works, right? That is the reality of it. So setting those up along with having those relationships is critical. It goes hand in hand, right? Just because, I invest a lot of time in personal relationships, work, understanding their skills, they're my team's goals, my team's every 90 days, whatever it may be, are very, very clearly articulated, and they're expected to drive to hit against those. And what I expect from my team, I tell them very early on, is be transparent. You're going to have misses, and you're going to have a lot of successes. I want to know about both, right? And if I need to help or guide you differently, then you need to come to me. But waiting to let things fester and not addressing it, that's when I think conversations get really difficult, right? If you address them early on, you can figure out ways to achieve what you need to achieve together. And the reality is sometimes if you can't, then as a leader, I would even say, by me investing this time in understanding their skills, their ambitions, their passions, maybe they're not in the right role, right? Things like that could happen, and maybe I could help facilitate a different path for them. But that's how you address those difficult conversations, right? I don't approach them as difficult. I think of them as opportunities to learn more and to better refine our path or our journey down the way we have to go. But yes, we have clear expectations, clear goals, and we will get there, but we won't let it fester. We'll address them head on.
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about being able to make mistakes and being allowed the room to fail a little bit. Can you share any of the failures you've had on your journey and what you learned from them and how you dealt with them?
Yeah, so from I think there's different levels of failure for everybody, right? It could be, as I mentioned this a little bit earlier, it could be, I set very high expectations for myself. So if I have a terrible presentation I'll beat myself up for a little bit, right? Internalize it and, feel a bit crappy about it. But it's what you do afterwards is what matters. And so if you had a terrible presentation and, it was in front of hundreds of people or whatever it may be, go ask for feedback, right? Don't shy away and not do anything about it. Go figure out where you need to improve, where are those opportunities. Go get some trusted guidance from someone that believes in you and mentors you, or even get some, outside views and perspectives, right? And then figure out what actions and what plans you can put in place to help you get past that, right? I think everyone's different in how they do things, right? Sometimes if I don't achieve my goals by certain days, I feel like those are failures. But again, it's going back and re-looking at things and then reestablishing how am I going to get there, or getting some other guidance of how am I going to go do it. It's all about what you do afterwards. You can't change what's happened. You can take those learnings. You can only take them and say, well, what can I do different next time? Or how can I get some help? Don't be afraid to go ask for guidance and help and support and how you're going to get there, and come up with a new plan, a new action, and take charge of it, right? Because at the end of the day, nobody's going to go through life without any failures, right? And everyone's failure is going to be different compared to what they're measuring themselves to, and then even what you're measured against from a business perspective, right? So it's what do you do after is the most important part.
Yeah, what you said really struck a chord with me, because as someone who's fairly young in her career, I think I'm really hard on myself too. Even when you said if you've had a bad presentation and whatnot, little things like that sometimes are like, they get to my head and I'm like, wow, I just failed so hard at that. So I have struggled with imposter syndrome in the past, and I'm kind of curious to know if you have as well, and if you did, what steps you took to kind of ease that imposter syndrome.
So I definitely have imposter syndrome, right? I think the steps that you take is you've just got to, first you've got to be aware of it, right? That's what you're doing. And then for me personally, once I become aware of that, I quickly pivot into figuring out what I need to do next. And also seeking guidance from my support network. I think that's really important, right? It's getting that support network that you build professionally and personally is critical, right? You're never going to be, as a leader, a one man or one woman, right? You have people around you, and so leverage them, right? Let them help you, and then take the steps that you're going to take to get it done, or change whatever you need to do it. But that support network is so critical, and then, recognizing that you're doing that to yourself is even more important. But then pivoting out of it is even more critical. And use your family and friends and your professional networks to help you get out of that, because it's not going to solve anything, and it's not going to help.
That's great advice. Thank you.
Alpa, you've mentioned a couple times now just how important it is to be seeking guidance, to get other points of view. And, that takes a lot of humility. It also takes being self-aware, to know when I need help. I need to get some advice on how to do something. Do you have any tips for somebody who's looking to build their self-awareness?
To build their self-awareness, yeah. So there's tools out there, right? So you can do things like the 360. You can get feedback from leadership, or just peers, and have one-on-ones. Building self-awareness is important, right? Because then where to work on and what to work on it, and then measure yourself on how you're improving. But I use a lot of one-on-ones to get feedback, right? Positive. I also ask a lot of questions on how would they manage certain situations. but you got to balance it too, right? At some point, you're right. I do mention guidance a lot, but you've got to also believe in yourself and get to that point where you're confident in your decisions, because that's part of a leadership skill too, right? Like your ability to make decisions and stand by those decisions, and then even if some decisions are made and you may have argued against it, your job as a leader now is to have other teams believe in it and move down that charge, right, or go down that charge. And so you've got to find the right balance of getting feedback and also being confident in your decisions, because that's what you're there to do as well, right? You want to have your teams come with you, right? You're along this journey together, so you have to show that as well. So it's an interesting, tricky balance, right? And depending on where you're at your career, the type of role you are, it's a give or take, and where you kind of emphasize when you have to do a little bit more self-reflection versus where you have to probably, be a lot more confident and just, go for it and make those decisions because you've got things to get done.
Like that. I'm curious about, as you're looking to build your team and as you hire more people, as you're looking at resumes and considering who to talk to, you're looking at their skill sets, their talents, but then you're also, when you're talking with people, you're trying to figure out, like, how gritty are they, how curious are they? I'm kind of curious about your process, what you're looking for when you're considering bringing on somebody new.
Yeah. So when I bring on someone new, I look at a couple different dimensions, right? I think, the traditional ways of looking at talent has changed. And what I mean by that is, you have to be very analytical. Could you navigate a spreadsheet or something like that and have those skills? But what I look at that is in the new way of bringing in talent is, yes, you have to have those core skills that you're very analytical, and I'm just picking on analytics for a second, but what insights can you draw from that, right? And, what is the story telling you, right? That's the type of person I look for, or individual that I look for. Is it's not that could you crank out a spreadsheet and crank out all these numbers. It's like, can you take that data and tell me what insights is driving, what story it's telling me, and what potential outcome are we going to be headed towards? And that lends itself to how curious of a person are you? What type of questions do you ask about that data? What type of questions do you think that we need to start that are like opportunities or gaps, right? And what is your determination and passion and ambition, right? Those are the type of things that I look at individuals that I bring into my team now. Being, technically smart, yeah, you're going to have a core set of skills, right? We know you're going to have to check the box on all those, but it's really some of these other areas that I feel when I build a team that those are the characteristics or skills that I'm looking for, because I don't want someone that can just, navigate a spreadsheet or go do something like this or pull a PowerPoint together. Those are all just basic skills. Everyone should have those now. It's your ability to, are you curious? How determined are you? Are you able to draw insights into, this type of information? How do you navigate and build those are the things that I look for key in my team that are really going to drive us towards success.
That's great. Earlier on, you did talk about how you knew you wanted to be a leader since you were young, and that sometimes leadership kind of does fall into your lap, and sometimes you actively and intentionally go look for leadership roles. We did receive a question from Sarah, who wants to know, for those who didn't think they'd have an interest in becoming a leader early on in life, do you think it's possible to develop skills to become a successful leader later on, or is it more of a natural occurrence?
I think it's absolutely, you can develop those skills later on, right? So if you think about, some basic leadership skills, right? Your ability to communicate, yeah, right? Your ability to tell a story, great interpersonal skills. Can you make decisions? Those are all characteristics that you're probably already developing in some shape or form. You can continue to develop those and then make it very clear to your leadership team that you're interested, right? And so there's potential areas that you may now need to start to enhance even more to go into those leadership roles. Absolutely. This isn't something that you have to be born with or want it from a very early age. It's absolutely perfectly fine to like say, or even people nowadays to say midway through your current role or, you know, wherever you're at in your career that I want to go more into these leadership roles, but identifying what are those areas that you need to improve, to work on, and then figuring out how you're going to do that to get yourself to the next role. And then communicating to people that that's what you want is pretty critical as well.
That's great. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Alpa, thank you so much for sharing with us. So I want to thank you so much for your time today. I want to let everyone know that this is a monthly series. We have different leaders coming to talk with us about leadership, and we definitely want to hear from you. So if you have suggestions on topics, leaders you want to hear from, please let us know. You can email us at lead@experian.com.
Thanks, Alpa, and thanks everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time. Have a good week.
Thank you.